I'm in my kitchen doing one of my favorite things to do on a cozy fall day, which is just get in the kitchen, light a candle, relax, and deal with some of the vegetables and fruits and meats or whatever it is I'm working with that week. I'll just get in the kitchen and get a little ahead for the week. And this doesn't happen all the time, but it is kind of a way to de-stress and relax. And I guess in a way, this is almost like a form of self-care for me. And I just love it. This is really something that brings me a lot of joy. So today I'm just going to light my little candle. It's starting to feel more like fall where I am. The temperature is definitely cooling down. So I'm just going to kind of cozy in my kitchen today while the kids run around playing in the house. And I'm going to have my little kitchen moment here while the chaos is still happening in the rest of my house. Whenever I'm in the kitchen and I know I'm going to be spending a lot of time in there, whether I'm cooking, doing the dishes, or just cleaning up around the house, I love to put on a little cozy autumn playlist. This is just a piano one. It's a bunch of instrumentals, so it's just really soothing and leaves space for your thoughts and prayers. I love it anytime I can help set the tone in my home, so putting on a sweet little piano playlist is definitely one of my favorite things to do this time of year. First thing I'm doing is I'm taking some white beans. I think these may be Great Northern white beans. I just bought them in bulk, and I'm just going to take these and put them in a bowl so that they can soak for the next day or two. I like to take some filtered water from my Berkey. This is by far my favorite water filter. And I just add in a good amount until they're completely covered, and I just let that sit in the bowl with a little splash of apple cider vinegar. This is optional, but I feel like not only does it help clean the beans, but it probably helps break down things that are on the outside so that they're more easily digestible. I also like to add in a splash of apple cider vinegar after they're done cooking too, right at the end, just to add back in some good probiotics. And then I always do a little sprinkle of sea salt just to help draw out those impurities in the beans. As soon as the weather starts to cool down, I immediately jump back into making my homemade stocks. And so today I'm going to go ahead and put one together. That way I can use it later on this week. So I like to make stocks a million different ways. I really change it all the time, and I feel like you can't go wrong. It's just vegetables, meat, lots of water, lots of salt. So today I'm just doing what I have, and I have some celery. This is nice and organic celery, so I'm going to use this, and along with a red onion and a few heirloom carrots that I picked up from Sprouts. That's where I always find these big heirloom carrots. They're so beautiful. They don't even have them at my local farmer's market, but they do have them at Sprouts, and when I see them, I love to have them. And now I'm just going to go ahead and wash this celery. And since it is organic, I'm just going to rinse it off with just water. And if it wasn't organic, I would soak it in my sink with water and apple cider vinegar for a few minutes. That way it can really break down any pesticides or anything it was sprayed with. But when it's organic, I like to leave some of that naturally occurring probiotic on, because whenever you wash away all the dirt from organic vegetables, you're getting rid of some of those good probiotics. So you don't need it to be perfectly cleaned. You can, or sanitized, I should say. You can leave a little bit on there. You don't have to completely scrub it down. So that's what I did here. I hope that makes sense. And then I'm just taking my celery and I'm going to use it, one for a snack that I'm going to put in my fridge, but then I'm going to use the tops and the little white part at the bottom that we don't really love to eat, especially the kids. Just the little part here you can see. I'm going to take that off and I'm going to put that in my stock. Making your own stock or broth sounds like it would be really fancy, but I promise this is super rustic. And even the carrots I leave whole, I don't peel them, and I just snap them in half with my hands, and it makes it really quick to put this together. I love how gorgeous these are inside. I'm actually growing some of these heirloom style big carrots in my garden right now. I've got like 5 different varieties of carrots, so apparently I really enjoy carrots. I just love how beautiful all these vegetables are, especially this time of year when we're starting to grow cool weather crops. Those are some of my favorites. So now I'm just taking the leftover celery that I didn't use in the stock, and I'm just putting them into little spears, and I can either use this later in the week. I can dice it up and put it in a soup, or I'll probably end up using this with my kids and just spreading a little bit of peanut butter on them and having them as a snack. Or we could even do hummus. So I love doing stuff like this because you can use it for different purposes, and it stays in the fridge really fresh for a pretty good amount of time. So I just cut them up like I said, and then I cover them with some more filtered water, and then I'll just cover them. And I love these little dishes I'm using. These are actually new. I wanted something that would be really good for prepping and actually keep things fresh. And they have like this little hole on it that you can seal up. So you press the lid down and it lets all the air out for the most part, and then you close the hole, and then it's really sealed up nicely. And I also love that the lid is glass on these versus plastic. It just feels better quality, and if you want to microwave it, then you can put the lid on and it won't have any plastic. So anyway, I love these, as you can tell. And now I'm just taking my red onion. Sometimes I'll use sweet onion. That's usually what I use, but today I had a red onion that I wanted to use up. So I'm just going to go ahead and just cube this up into big chunks and throw that in the stock pot too. And that's actually another reason why I love making homemade stocks, is because so many of us usually have vegetables that will go to waste. And so a great way to use up those vegetables that maybe aren't the crunchiest anymore is just throw them in a big pot of stock, because they're going to boil down anyway, but then they don't get wasted. So I love making these homemade stocks a million different ways, just with whatever veggies are in the fridge. I like to add in a bay leaf for a little bit of depth of flavor, and then I add in a sprinkle of peppercorns just to add that kind of warmth to it, and then I'm adding in a good bit of salt, and this is good quality sea salt. The Celtic sea salt I normally use has been out of stock on Amazon for a really long time, and so I started buying this salt recently, and it's actually I think it's from Sicily in Italy. So it's good quality sea salt. And so I'm adding in a bunch of that. And that's a key component in the stock. You just want to make sure that you add plenty. So if your stock tastes like water, you just need to probably add a lot more salt, and then the flavor will start to come through. You'll just want to fill up whatever stock pot you're using. I use the Instant Pot, and I just fill that up with a whole bunch of water, and I pressure cook that for 40 minutes, and it makes really quick stock. Otherwise, you can let it slow cook pretty much all day. Now I'm just taking some of these delicious 100% grass-fed Polish sausages, and I'm giving these a slice so that I can have these in the fridge this week, because I can do it with things like scrambled eggs. I can put it in bean dishes. I can put it on a sheet pan for a sheet pan dinner. So I love having things that are versatile. In this one, you don't even really have to cook ahead of time. You can just prep it and then quickly throw it in whatever you're making. So it's a great thing to have on hand. And even though it is a processed meat, it's 100% grass fed. So there's still plenty of good fats in it and good protein, especially for the kids. If your kids enjoy hot dogs or things like that, then this is a great alternative, because the fats in grass fed meat is a lot better for you. If you guys are kind of building out your kitchens and your kitchen gadgets and products and things that you use in your kitchen, always be sure to check out my description box, because I try to fill it out with things that I really love and use in my kitchen. So if you're looking for any of that, I know some of you guys ask me sometimes where I get certain things. I always try to have things linked down below, so check there. This is one of my newer purchases, is this green, like emerald green material cutting board, and this is my favorite. I'm going to be using it all fall and winter. So after all of my sausage was done being chopped, I just put that in a little stainless steel bowl, and these are great because they come with lids, so I can just pop that in the fridge and have that ingredient prepped and ready to go for the week. The next thing I need to do today is de-stem some of my dinosaur kale, and I like to take the stem off and then I'll just kind of slice up the leaves, and this makes it so much easier when you're trying to cook for scratch for a family and you're really busy, even if it's just for yourself. It's so much easier to take something like dinosaur kale and take a dish of it and just sprinkle it into something than it is to pull out the kale, wash it, de-stem it, chop it right when you're cooking dinner. It really is so much easier easier to have stuff like this prepared ahead of time, so that way you can just throw in 5 different vegetables, but it took no effort at all while you were cooking dinner, so you can get dinner on the table a lot quicker. I think a lot of people also think that they don't like things like kale, and it's usually because the bags at the grocery store of like pre-chopped kale usually have all the stems on it, and I don't think anybody wants to chew through kale stems. They're incredibly fibrous, so if you do it at home and you remove those stems the right way and shred up that kale really nice and finely, it will melt into any dish. It'll be great in a salad if you massage it with your hands and really work in the dressing. Kale is just as good as any other lettuce, and it cooks down just as easily as spinach the smaller you chop it. You don't have to store this any fancy way, so I'm just going to put this in one of my glass containers like I did with the celery, and I'm not going to cover it with water or anything. I'm just going to put the lid on and let that air out, and that should keep this fresh for probably about 4 days in the fridge. It should last us for a decent amount of time. This morning I went ahead and I fed my sourdough starter because I knew I was going to want to make bread this afternoon and get it ready for tomorrow. So I went ahead and fed it this morning. I don't really measure, I just kind of get it to the right consistency. And then as you can see here, it's completely bubbled over, which is a good sign that this thing is ready to go. So I'm just putting my hair back because there's been too many loaves of bread where I've found my hair in it. So in all transparency, we have to put the hair in a braid and get it out of the way. There's really only a couple things that I use my sourdough starter for, and one of the main things I have it for is for my bread. And really I like to make this bread the easiest way possible. So I use what I call my bread dough tub, and I use that along with a digital scale, which sounds really intimidating, but it actually is easier than measuring it scoop for scoop, because I would follow so many recipes that use the measuring cups and it would turn out a little bit different every time, and I feel like it's a little bit easier for me to use a digital scale. So if you haven't tried it with your sourdough, maybe just try that. I know a lot of people have a hard time getting the consistency right, but it's kind of a matter of how thick your starter is, how thin it is, how long you ferment it. There's so many variables, so I thought I would just show you how I do mine exactly. So I use my sourdough starter here, and I add in about 250 grams of my sourdough starter. And then I like to add in water that's just a little bit warm. You don't want hot water because that will kill off your yeast, which sourdough starter, all it is just regular live and active yeast. It's been around forever and ever, and that's just yeast. So in order to keep that alive, we just want to feed it with a little bit of warm water. And so I like to put some filtered water in my tea kettle, and I'll just let it barely heat up. Like, I don't let it boil or even simmer and get a bunch of bubbles. You just want to barely warm it so it's a little bit warmer than room temperature. You really kind of have to baby that, but I don't use a thermometer or anything for that. I just make sure it's just a little bit heated. And then I'll do about 735 grams of water, sometimes less. I'll pull back a little bit if my starter seems a little on the thin side. I'll just do a tiny bit less water. And overall, it's really easy to kind of gauge that, how wet or dry your dough is, so I don't worry about it too much. And then I add in about 24 or 25 grams of salt, and this will vary too depending on the kind of salt you use, but like I said, I'm using a fine sea salt, so I'm going to use about 24 grams of salt today. And I know some people will have you measure it out and add it into your dough later after the dough is rested. And I've tried it both ways, adding it up front and then adding it later, and I can't tell a big difference. My bread still rises very well even when I add it up front, so I just go ahead and knock it out, because there have been countless times where I've forgotten to add the salt and I bake the dough and it's all done and it tastes like nothing, because salt is key. Just like for the stock, you need salt in cooking. So I'm adding in now about 1,000 grams of flour, and I'll do a mixture of all-purpose organic unbleached flour and my freshly milled whole grain flour. And sometimes I'll just do more of the whole wheat, sometimes I'll do more of the all-purpose. I kind of play around with it, or if I'm running out of one flour, I'll do more of the other. So then I just add my salt, and that is it. It's super easy to measure. I'll leave the measurements that I do for my sourdough bread in the description box. It yields about 2 decent size sourdough boules, which is just like a crusty bread. Next, I just use the same spurtle, I think is what it's called, that I use for my sourdough starter. And I just mix this up with the little spurtle until all of the flour is incorporated into the water. And then I let it sit for about half an hour before I do anything else. So it's really easy. I just put it all in there, weigh it out. It takes me all of about 2 minutes to throw together this whole dough. It's crazy. So I just mix it together real quick, and then I put the lid on and let that sit on the counter for a little while. Sometimes I let it sit on the counter for a few hours, and it always turns out fine. Another thing that is really simple but is such a time saver and a dish saver is just buying your block of cheese and then grating it and putting it in an airtight container. So I like to buy the organic raw sharp cheddar cheese. That's pretty much our favorite. And so I'll just grate that up at the beginning of the week and then put it in a container. And so I don't have to grate it each time I go to use a little bit on our eggs or use a little bit on a salad or whatever I'm doing with it. I just like to grate up that whole block and get it in the fridge. But it's so much better than the cheese that has the powdered anti-caking agent on it, so I like to buy it in the block and shred it the good old-fashioned way. So out of the fridge with all of my produce from my garden, I'm pulling out a couple of these little honey nut squashes. They're basically just mini butternut squashes, and I'm just going to peel these and have them be cubed up and then placed in a dish for either soups or roasting or sheet pan dinners, whatever I'm doing with it later in the week. I've been making a bunch of butternut squash soup lately. I like to just reheat it really quickly for lunch, or I'll make roasted butternut squash and actually eat it for breakfast. That's actually really good with sausage. There is one specific meal I want to make this week that's kind of on my meal plan, and so I'm going to take the peel off of all this squash just to make it easy, because the recipe I'm going to make later on, I actually don't want the peel on, though normally I would leave the peel on because I love the texture when it's roasted and everything, but it just kind of depends on whatever recipe you're doing. For soups, I'll take the peel off, and for chilies, I'll take the peel off, but if I'm just roasting it, or I guess roasting it or air frying it, I will leave that peel on because of all the good nutrients, and I just love the texture that it gives. And you'll see I'm taking all of the scraps that I have of my veggies today and I'm putting them in a little bowl. And that's because I like to save those scraps either for composting, or today I'm going to take them out to my little chickens and let them nibble at some of these veggie scraps that are safe for them. So I'm just going to collect all that, and you can do that too. There's a lot of like counter compost bins nowadays that you can use. And if you have a garden, then that is a great way to add some good nutrients to your garden that doesn't cost any extra. And it kind of makes me feel better about wasting the little bits of food, especially vegetables. So if you haven't tried one of those, you could try that. So these honey nut squash seeds, I'm just scraping out straight into the bowl, and the chickens will devour that. I could also save the seeds from these and use them again for next year when I'm planting these squash. I love them, so I'm definitely going to be planting them again next year. I love how bright orange they are, and I think they're a little bit more sweet and flavorful than just regular butternut squash. And of course, I love that they're mini. I put them on the counter as my fall decor, so it's a win-win with these cute little squashes. So I'm just going to slice these up and then put them in cubes, and I like to do about maybe like a half an inch to an inch, because I don't want them so small that when I roast them, they just kind of fall apart. So I leave them a little bit chunkier, especially for soups and things like that. You want to have some good texture. So I'm just going to cut these all up and pop them in my dish, and then those can go in the fridge as well. So my dough has been sitting now for about maybe 30 minutes. And so I'm going to go ahead and just do a couple stretch and folds. And I don't do this fancy at all. All I do is I get my hands a little bit wet with some water, because this keeps the dough from sticking to you. So that is a key here. Don't add more flour to make it less sticky. Just add water to your hands and it keeps it from sticking all over you. So I just kind of pull it up and then fold it over. And that is all I do. I just do it a handful of times, and it just helps the dough to have good structure when you bake it, and it also helps, I think, add a little bit of air bubbles in there and gives you that really good sourdough crumb. So I just kind of fold this over a few times, and then I will either let it sit on the counter if I want to cook it later that day, or like today I'll be cooking it in the morning. So I'm just going to put the lid on this now and put it in my fridge overnight, and in the morning I will take the dough and separate it into 2 different loaves, put that in a floured Banneton basket for an hour or 2, and then it'll have risen, and I will put that in the pans, the Dutch ovens that I use to bake this, and that will be my bread. So it is not a labor intensive process. It's one thing at a time, and it's really super simple, I promise. So now my stock has been going in the Instant Pot. I pressure cooked it so it would be done really quickly. And now I'm just straining it out through a colander into a bowl, and then I'm going to jar it in my Weck jars here. I love that for broth. It's one of my favorite ways to store it. You could use a mason jar too, or even just a Tupperware. Just let it cool down. If it's plastic or if it's glass, it'll be hot, so just be careful. And then put it through the sieve to get out all the chunky vegetables, but then I also will put it through either a fine mesh strainer, which I couldn't find mine that day, so I ended up using a nut milk bag, which is made of cheesecloth. So I just use that in a little funnel to get it in my jars, and then I just let that cool on the counter before I placed it in the fridge.